Without Faith, Without Law, Without Joy is a short story by Saladin Ahmed that subverts Edmund Spenser's epic poem called The Fairy Queen, and it basically reimagines the three evil Saracen brothers, Sansfoy, Sansloy, and Sansjoy, which are found in The Fairy Queen, and it portrays them as victims in the story, in Saladin's story, and the short story is found in Rags and Bones, New Twists on Timeless Tales and anthology, and this anthology also consists of other writers as well. So Without Faith, Without Law, Without Joy is based on, like we said, The Fairy Queen. So The Fairy Queen, this is the origin summary of it, is a is a massive epic poem by Edmund Spenser, and it's basically like an allegorical epic poem that was published in the 1590s, and it follows like several knights on quests, and it represents like moral virtues such as holiness and temperance and chastity, and basically these virtues were aimed to fashion the ideal man or ideal gentleman in like a virtuous discipline, and it's a celebration of like Protestantism and Queen Elizabeth I, who is actually the first monarch to be Protestant, and the epic poem is set in a fantastical world full of dragons and sorcerers and also enchanted forests. So one of the books, well, the epic poem is consisted of many books. It's divided into many books, and the first book is called Holiness. Well, it's based on holiness, the idea of holiness, and book one is basically about the Red Cross Knight, who is the main character in the story, who fights error and deceit to serve the truth, basically. And he learns to overcome pride, but also falls into sin before being saved and before killing a dragon, which symbolizes the purification of the Christian soul. And there are other books representing other things, like I mentioned, but we will focus on book one, Holiness. So book one, the idea of this book is basically to cover the concept of holiness. So here's a quote from Saladin Ahmed's short story, Without Faith, Without Law, Without Joy. And he kind of speaks a lot about holiness in his story as well. So here's a quote from his story. Holiness has murdered my brave brother. Holiness has mangled my mind and my name. Holiness has stolen God's love from me. So the idea of holiness in book one, in the original epic poem, The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser, this concept of holiness is really embodied by one character, the main character, called the Red Cross Knight, and he serves the main protagonist of book one, basically. And the Red Cross Knight is funny because it's called a Red Cross, and you can see in this picture in the background, it's kind of like the Templar Knight or the Crusader Knight. And the Red Cross Knight represents like the Christian everyman, or like the Protestant individual striving for spiritual purity. And they often battle, well, the Red Cross Knight often battles the both internal and external weaknesses and temptations of evil. And it centers around the Christian struggle for faith and holiness against inwardly and outwardly battle of sin. And every character that the Red Cross Knight faces is literally, it's every every character that the Red Cross Knight faces is in opposition to the concept of holiness in Christianity. So then we ask ourselves, what does this concept of holiness actually mean in Christianity? So what is it actually? So God's holy nature is being set apart from his creation. That's what holiness basically means. It means that because God is holy, everything else that's not holy is set apart from him. So in Christianity, creation is always wounded by sin. So to get closer to God, one must also set apart themselves from sin. One must also set themselves apart from sin. So the Red Cross Knight embodies the idea of holiness, because the story is about striving to reach this concept of holiness. And he's on a journey towards spiritual maturity and purification, and also virtue. And he fights against falsehood and seeks for the truth. And although initially falling for traps and the vices of the world, the battle against these monsters, these vices, such as error and despair, is the path to holiness itself. And the fact that you're fighting the battle physically, it actually physically also sets you apart from sin, or it sets apart the Red Cross Knight from sin. So the actual character represents holiness and the Protestant faith. And we see in book 1, he encounters very special characters. So 3 of these are the Saracen brothers, Sans Foy, Sans Joy, and Sans Loy, who represent like the vices and the non-Christian faithless adversaries. So these are the pagan disbelievers of the story, who represent unholiness. And these encounters serve as like allegorical tests for Red Cross, and they represent like unbelief and the lack of joy and lawlessness. In fact, Sans Foy, Sans Joy, and Sans Law actually means without faith, without joy, without law. So we ask a different question now. Why have these characters have been added to the story? Like, what was the context? We're going to learn that Saracen actually means Muslim. It's kind of common knowledge that Saracen means Muslim because of the Crusades. But then we ask ourselves, like, the Crusades happened in before this time. So why did the author actually add these characters in? Why did a Christian man, a Protestant man, add Muslim characters in his story? So the Crusades, or the Crusades, happened in around like 1000s, and 1200s, and they were a series of religious wars launched by the Western European Christians, mainly to reclaim the Holy Land of Jerusalem from Muslim control and assist the Byzantine Empire against the Seljuk Turks. And this was because they wanted to secure their pilgrimage routes. And this spanned like a long stream of battles and wars between these two factions, I guess, or religions. And the Crusaders largely viewed Muslims in this time as infidels, pagans, and also like a hostile, accursed race that needed to be driven out from the Holy Land, which is not too dissimilar from nowadays, sadly. Early perceptions were fueled by like fanatical religious hatred and propaganda, but also evolved into pragmatic and complex mix of fear and respect for the other, for the military prowess, and for coexistence. So there was a time where the Crusades actually held Jerusalem for quite some time, and they kind of started to live amongst the Muslims, and every time they fought, they would kind of have a certain respect for them, especially for especially for people like Salahuddin, or Saladin in English, which is funny because the author of this story that we're going to speak about is called Saladin as well. So they really respected Salahuddin al-Ayyubi because of his military might, but also because of his respect to others as well. And this term Saracen is like a historical term for Muslims itself during the Middle Ages. And to the Crusaders, Saracen was basically synonymous with infidel or pagan too. And in fact, in medieval literature, like the Song of Roland, Saracens were actually depicted as polytheistic villains who worshipped idols, which is funny because in Narnia, we mentioned in our previous video, C.S. Lewis does the exact same thing where the Kalomen, who are supposed to be like Muslim kind of figures, who wear turbans and robes and have long beards, they also are polytheistic and they worship another like devil-like creature called Tash, which we mentioned before. And you wonder why Christians in this time think that Islam is paganistic when it's literally the opposite. So Edmund Spenser and the Saracen brothers, sans foi actually means without faith. And the first brother, this is the first brother that the Red Cross meets and also kills in combat really early in the poem. And sans joy, which is without joy, is the brother who seeks to avenge him. And sans loy is the last brother, the middle brother, who also attempts to take revenge on both of them, for both of them, I mean, and kills Red Cross's companion Lion. So we see that these fights against the Saracen brothers enables Spenser to explore themes of like religious conflict between Protestantism or Christianity and Islam, and the struggle against heresy and the necessity of holiness to be tested and strengthened. So to Edmund Spenser, Islam, Muslims and Saracens represent everything unholy. So Red Cross is basically made an example to counteract it. And his fight against them is him becoming more holy. So where do we find Saracens in other literature and myth and even in modern day? Because Saracen, the term still kind of exists now. So really ancient, well, kind of ancient, we find like the Saracen in Sir Palamedes, who's a prominent like knight of the Round Table in Arthurian legend, and he's best known as the hunter of the questing beast, and also he's really known for his unrequited love for Isolde, who is fueled by the long-standing rivalry of Sir Tristan, which I'm gonna get to later. But yeah, although he was born a pagan, he was actually a Saracen. He eventually converted to Christianity later in life, and this was followed by a duel with Tristan or Galahad, depending on the story that you read. So here we learn that Muslims have kind of been depicted in literature as the other, even in these like way back when, and are basically represented in broad paganistic tropes even then as well. And if they kind of make it seem like Islam is not even Abrahamic, or Christianity is not even Middle Eastern, because it seems so far-fetched. Paganism and Islam are really like far apart. It's the total opposite, and it kind of speaks to how they weren't really educated, or they didn't care to learn about Islam in the same way that Muslims actually learn about Christianity, because we believe that Christianity and Judaism originally were true messages, but they've been altered, and our origin is kind of one in Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, but they don't really acknowledge that either. So yeah, this trope actually in literature bleeds into the modern day, where we see the Red Cross, the flag of England, our country, as a sign of anti-immigrant sentiments. So even in where I live, whenever there's a protest of anti-immigration, they would always fly the flag of England as a show of dominance, I guess. But it's funny because this type of symbol was used in the Middle Ages too. So yeah, the idea of fantasy in literature to this day still depicts like a broadly European medieval image. So whenever I think of fantasy, or whenever people think of fantasy, they would think of the Arthurian legend or stuff like knights or medieval things or the Middle Ages, but not like any other thing. So where does this lead us to? Saladin's without faith, without law, without joy. These, as we know now, that they're the names of the three Saracen brothers, but in English. So this is kind of like a quote from the very, very beginning of the story, but it's also a quote from the Fairy Queen. So there lies he now with foul dishonor dead, who while he lewd was called proud Sansfoy, the eldest of three brethren, all three bred of one bad sire, whose youngest is Sans Joy, and twixt them both was born the bloody bold Sans Loy. So in plain English, because this is kind of old English, the bad sire birthed three sons, the oldest of them Sans Foy, which we know is without faith, and the second in between them that was born was Sans Loy, which is lawless, and the youngest one was Sans Joy, which is joyless. So without faith, without law, without joy describes like a nightmarish trapped existence, and the characters are modeled on the Saracen brothers, who live in disoriented, twisted, in a disoriented, twisted place, stripped of memories and identities, and they basically experience a bleak and monotonous and surreal existence where they can't really find any escape from where they are, which is in Albion. And Albion is basically the traditional word for the UK or Britain, and it's also the place, the mythical land where King Arthur was based in. So his story kind of flips the narrative, making the original hero of Red Cross referred to as holiness or a saint, a wicked sorcerer who kidnaps and strips the brothers of their names and memories. So the author also reinterprets the evil Saracens of classic literature as victims, and the story serves as an allegory for immigration and the loss of cultural heritage and the pressures to shed one's identity to please a dominant heroic force, which is in Red Cross. And it focuses on the trauma also of being depersonalized and the resilience found in trying to remember one's true self. And the narrative really challenges the black and white portrayal of good versus evil in historical and literary narratives, and also in traditional Western fantasy tropes. So, like I said, the key example of this is basically the Fairy Queen, also in Arthurian legends, and also in things like Narnia and The Lord of the Rings, where they always fight the Eastern people. They always fight kind of the strangers, the foreigners, the brown people. So what I learned about reading this story was So yeah, what I learned about reading this story was about spiritual homelessness, and basically the narrator of the story identifies as joyless, and he also describes like being ripped from his home in Damascus, like a place of tea, of culture, of love, and now is in a land of blood and iron masks. And his kidnapping is involuntary, obviously, and his displacement is kind of a form of spiritual homelessness, where they're alienated from their own souls. Like they barely remember who they were in Damascus when they came newly to England, and they have also like lost their ability with the divine as well, and described as a state where they are forced to act as part animal, and their joy that they once had is replaced by a dark magic that produces only flashes of painful memories for them, and they're trapped in an endless struggle, and the homelessness now is a permanent state of suffering, and the brothers are really compelled to fight like an eternal, unwinnable battle against their captor, rendering them like animal-like or bestial. So if I go back to the first quote that I said, holiness has stolen God's love from me. That's kind of like a example of how everything's been stolen, even their religion's been stolen from them. So yeah, this kind of reminded me about how we live in the West. We as Muslims live in the West. So, for example, like the brothers who were stripped of their memories and forced into a pantomime existence for someone else's spiritual advancement, which is Red Cross's holiness of Red Cross, was reinforced by him fighting Muslims because they saw them as disbelievers and unholy. Muslims, like living in the West, often feel pressured to perform specific, like flattened versions of their identity to satisfy Western societal expectations. And what this does is basically have a diluted existence, because we're not really fulfilling our cultural existence. We kind of have to half it instead, and not feeling at home in a country of birth and not being made to feel included in the ancestral land really kind of creates a state of physical, like literal homelessness, because you're not accepted in either country. And despite being born in this country, in the UK, we still feel like an exile at home, and a sense of non-belonging despite being citizens, despite being born here. Even if we were born here, we don't really feel or we don't really resonate with the country's culture or history or myths spiritually on a deeper level. So I give the example of maybe like King Henry VIII. I don't really care about that type of history, and I'm pretty sure majority of Muslims don't really care on a spiritual deeper level that King Henry VIII is my flesh and blood, which is not true. And I mean, although that type of history is entertaining, they make it entertaining, but it's not really important. Not compared to something like Salahuddin, which is important for me, but may not be important for the Western world. Whereas for them, they like King Henry VIII, but I would never. So stuff like that. The difficulty of maintaining like ancestral traditions, languages, and spiritual wholeness is also kind of hostile or alien to others. And this can really be difficult to maintain, to maintain your traditions and language and spiritual life it's hard to maintain it if everyone else sees these things as alien, and it's not like the whole society is not really facilitated towards your practices, which makes it really hard to live. But I'll get into that in the next slide. But what I want to say is also is that this feeling alien is kind of reinforced by a lot of modern day sentiments, for even within the community itself, even within the Muslim community itself. So, for example, the term freshie in the UK or fob in fresh off the boat in the US is used to make someone feel more alien than they are, when they're actually just trying to be more in tune with the ancestral lands. And a key example for this one is, personal example, is wearing traditional clothing. So, for example, I still wear salwar kameezes even at home. And before, when I was a teenager, I used to wear it also outside. But there's a really, it's very like awkward to do that now. I mean, even back then. And I would get like questions like, why am I even wearing that? Or like, and I really kind of felt awkward because I know in their mind they would probably think that, oh, I'm a freshie or something like that. So I just stopped wearing it, and now I wear Western clothes outside, but I still wear Asian clothes at home. But it's kind of sad, because you're not really, you kind of feel isolated even within your own culture. And there's like a sense of shame by showing your own culture as well. So I recently went to Umrah, and I just realized this as well. So Salah culture is really non-existent in the West. And as a Muslim and in Islam, your entire schedule should revolve around prayer. And because the UK or the Western world doesn't have any facilities to facilitate that, it becomes really hard or tiresome to live day to day. So for me personally, because I'm a woman, it's really hard to find female-only prayer spaces or like secluded areas for females. And it's hard to find a prayer space in general. So it's even more harder for a woman as well. So what you're kind of resorted to praying in a random room or praying outside. And it's really awkward because these people, they don't even know what you're doing. And you kind of just, you just have to do it basically. And to do wudu is even worse. To do it in a public bathroom when there's nothing, when there's no like wudu area. And people really find these practices very alien to them. They don't really know why you're doing it. Even praying in general, they don't even pray in the Western world nowadays. They kind of find it backwards, I think. Even in Christianity, praying culture has very much declined. So praying every day isn't very normal for them. But when I went to Saudi Arabia, and even when I go to Bangladesh, I always like wondered, why do I feel so relaxed? And then during Umrah, it kind of clocked on me that I just found it very comfortable because everything is just facilitated around your needs. So praying culture in Umrah in Saudi is very normal, and you don't really have to worry about wudu or salah. And that just makes life really easy, 5 times a day. But there's also like a caveat to that. Living like a comfortable lifestyle is kind of like living on a sleep mode compared to being aware that you're Muslim. So since the Western Muslims come from a land where we always have to be on guard because we're spiritually homeless, and because no one knows who we are, no one knows our culture, no one knows what we do, we basically have to always remember that we're Muslims. we've become really hyper aware of Muslims around the world and what they're up to, because no one is really Muslim. No, no one like is Muslim on a societal level in our country. Like, we basically lack a ummah in our country, so we seek for the global ummah outside, and their struggles also become our struggles because we really resonate with them. And whenever like a country gets hit because they're Muslim or because they're brown, we really feel that, because we know what it's like to feel hostility, and we know that how hard it is to live as a Muslim. So when we see other Muslims hurting in the way that they do, we really sympathize too with them. I mean, compared to people who live on autopilot in Muslim countries, they don't really have to worry about wudu or salah or what to eat or what to wear, and it's just their daily normal life, and they don't really have an urgency to claim their Islam because they already have everything that they need in their country, and they don't have a sense of our Islam is being attacked in a regular basis, physically or mentally, unlike people in the West, that we kind of feel that all the time, so we know what it's like. And because Muslims like live in a Muslim country, it can kind of seem more of a culture than having to think about every decision that they make deeply, compared to Muslims where we have to decide even what to eat. So yeah, spiritual homelessness, that's a deep topic that it really resonated with me for this short story as well. So another topic which really resonated with me is the power of a name. And basically, in the story, the character Joyless is forced to adopt the name Joyless. That's not his real name, but it kind of becomes his reality within the hateful Albion setting, which we said that it was the word for the Old English word for the UK or Britain, and the backdrop of King Arthur. And basically it replaces his personal identity, so he actually becomes joyless. So this is a quote from the book, from the short story. If this doesn't really make you read the story, I don't think anything will, because this is really well written actually. So yeah, so who am I? I don't know how he changed our names, but in this world of lions and giants and a blinding shine of armor, I am called Joyless, as if it were a name. It was not my name, it is not my name, but this is his place, and it follows his commands. And thus, now, here, Joyless is my name, and Joyless has always been my name. This place, this Albion, has scrawled its hateful sigils over even the past. Now, whenever I remember my mother's voice calling for me across the small souk, I can only hear her voice of rock and honey calling, Joyless, Joyless, come here at once. Now my father's last whispered words to me as sunlight streamed in the wood lattice window. His last words all those years ago were, Joyless, my beloved. Thanks be to God that you are such a smart boy. It is the only name I can find in my mind now. Whatever name I was once called, whatever name I once called myself, has been stolen. Joyless. A part of me knows it to be false. Some small, near-dead piece of my soul knows that I was once a joyful man. Sometimes God grants me flashes of a man I once was, of what joy was. The feel of the falconer's glove as I hunted with my beautiful birds, the jeweled light on the water the first time I saw the sea, the old poet at court granting my scribblings unfeigned praise. These are the sunbeams that break the mark for a moment here and there. Memories is too weak a word. They are like lightning, like the pain a marked thief or maimed soldier still feels in a hand that has been lost, but they are so fleeting that they do, in fact, become flashes of pain, and each day they fade, fewer, farther. Each day it becomes easier to succumb to the grim magic of this place that has claimed my kin, to forget joy, to forget who I am. That writing is really good. It just made me remember, or made me realize, kind of, how personally I literally colonized my own name. My name is Seymour. Well, that's the colonized version of it, and that's how I say it in my mind. But the actual word, the actual name, is actually Saima, which my parents called me. And the fact that I kind of used the Western version, well, that's kind of the name that I've grown up with. And in my primary school, that's what they used to call me. So I kind of just internalized it. But literally, like, my mom calls me a different name than what I have in my mind. And it just speaks to the dichotomy of the two worlds, I think. Now, like, you can really literally call me whatever you want. I don't really care about names anymore, just because, like, I realized that. But reading this, it really made me relate to the character. Because for me, like, I don't even know what my name is now either. So, what do we learn from this story? In the end, we see that Joyless realizes his identity eventually, and he faces the last battle against the magical Red Cross Knight and actually begins to accept his fate in the maddening world. He accepts his death eventually. And the narrator, who names himself Joyless, or who other people call him Joyless, begins to break through the magical compulsion that stole his memory, and he starts to remember his life in Damascus again. And the final duel, where he battles the saint or the knight, the Red Cross Knight, is kind of like marked with sorcery, and it kind of begins to feel like a mock world, like a make-believe world. And he kind of just realizes that his fate is kind of sealed like his brothers, Faithless and Lawless, that have been both destroyed by the Red Cross Knight. And he eventually surrenders to the Red Cross Knight and accepts like a final duel. And before that, he actually contemplates him ending himself, basically. But because he remembers his brothers now as good, instead of people calling them faithless and lawless, he calls them now faith and law. Even in Arabic, which they're the real names, he remembers the real names, and he realizes that these names are actually faith and law. And remembering that, he kind of has the courage to fight himself instead of ending himself. And ultimately, he is defeated by the knight, but he fights valiantly and with dignity, and the reader is only left with respecting him. And you respect him for finding his identity. And it kind of makes you think how we need to find our courage to find our own voices too. And we need to respect where we come from. And we need to acknowledge where we come from. Instead of having this like amnesia of not knowing where we're from. because I feel like Western Muslims, they're very distanced towards their ancestral lands. They kind of lose their language, they lose their clothing and their tradition. If we don't remember where we come from, then what's the point? Like, what identity do we even have? So the final words that Saladin kind of gives us as a summary of himself, of his short story, in his own words. In the last part of the book, he says, Sir Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene is in many ways the acknowledged ur-text of the modern Anglophone epic fantasy novel. Everything we love about epic fantasy, swords, fights, monsters, jaw-dropping scale, a cast of thousands, deliberate antiquarianism, the ability to make magic real to the rational reader is there in The Faerie Queene, Book 1. At least it's one of the masterpieces of English literature. However, The Faerie Queene also prefigures many epic fantasy's weaknesses. It rambles horribly in later books and was in fact never finished. There's far too much description of clothing. More important, via a series of gruesome caricatures of women, of Arabs, of Catholics, Spenser sets a sort of precedent for epic fantasy's all too common hatred of the other. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Book 1's reoccurring Muslim villains, the Saracen brothers, Sansfoy, Sansloy, and Sansjoy, have always spoken to me. What was it like for them, being trapped in this hateful allegory? That question led to the story. No words for that. So, reading that story, I can't tell you how much of an inspiration it was for me. I actually, well, at first, I read it I read it on his Medium channel, and read it just visually, and then I listened to it in an audio version in a podcast while on a bus, while going home from work, and by the end I got really emotional as well listening to it, because it's kind of a story which speaks to all Muslims living in the West, and there's so much things that you can relate to because of it, and it really made me think about how I view living in this country too, and how lost one can feel living in this country, even when I went to Umrah as well. It's kind of like a coming home feeling, but also like a lost feeling too. So yeah, this story really is kind of the inspiration for my own fictional story. And I said before in my other videos that I do write fictional stories, and one of my projects is actually based on this, and the story is kind of like similar to the main character of this short story, where it's kind of a Sans Joy character, joyless. He even calls himself joyless too, and he's kind of the main character. How to describe it? The main character is basically a Saracen who is born in a Western land, in the Western land of Albion, set in the mythic land of Albion during like the Arthurian legend era, and he's a Saracen knight too, so he kind of grapples with the fact that he's brown looking. He's a Saracen, but at the same time he's brought up in a church, and the story is basically about how he feels very lost and very homeless, and his basically different identities of the Western world, and also of his lost identity, which he doesn't even know as well. And yeah, that's kind of the story. And the main characters, like I said, is based on Sans Roy, but it's also based on Palamedes, which I mentioned in this presentation as well, and also Sir Tristan. So yeah, I'll put up a video on like a audio version of what I have so far. Well, it's actually like a snippet of what I have. I kind of have like 4 chapters. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you want me to post like more sections of the story as well, or if you want to beta read or alpha read the story, I can send it to you too if you're interested. So yeah, I really hope you read Saladin's Without Faith, Without Law, Without Joy, especially if you're a Western Muslim. I think every Western Muslim should read this story because it really resonates hard and emotionally as well. So yeah, if you have any recommendations of what to cover next, because I'm really running out of content ideas, so I'd really appreciate if you can like maybe give me recommendations of what to cover, even if like I haven't read the book or the movie or something like that, or watched the movie. I'd still be up for reading it or watching it. So yeah, hope you enjoyed. See you on the next one. I'm not sure what the next one is. Maybe I'll cover more of the Arthurian legends in depth, because I'm really interested in that too. And maybe I'll cover Palamedes as well, and Sir Tristan, and I'll cover more of my story too. So yeah, assalamu alaikum. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. And yeah, bye.
Now, drink from the Grail and quench your thirst, Sir Harry and Simon, moonlit night of the Somerset Isles. Upon the third effort, blessed you were, born together with your 2 relations of whom none shall be named, nor recalled in the lighthouse citadel of Nightingale Castle. You have uniquely been placed among the ancient greats, and have bestowed honour to the holiest of creeds. Take up the mantle of your forebears before you, and come, let me have a look at your face.
Pope Innocent XII IV brushed his wet fingers on the tip of his wineglass, and then proceeded to cup my face with his watery hands.
You were only a boy when the council took you in,
he said, rubbing the corner of my lip. His hands soothed the sore that had plagued my face for many weeks, and the stinging sensation subsided with his cold touch. It had been caused by the frigid winter storms that hailed from far in the east. My dear Pope has told me stories of my summer birth in the biting heat, how the Lord had given me a natural inclination and a sincere devotion to warmth, while bearing the grudges of the frost and a contempt for Arctic winds.
Drink from the cup and blood of Christ. Drink in order to cleanse yourself from your kin. Drink in the honour and order of this council, for you shall be welcomed in with open arms, received as if you were an infant among us again. Though this time you will be accepted willingly, for you have chosen our brotherhood and our saintly endeavours. You have become our brother, my brother.
All my life I had roamed within the stones of this castle, like a dark phantom. All my life I have served Pope Innocent the 24th and my masters. And dear mentals, as if they were my own fathers, and I had called all of them by that affectionate name, for I have never known my true father, nor my true mother, and scarcely recall my brothers, who had been with me and found beside me as a babe in the lighthouse. All alone, I held myself in and among the sea of brown-robed men, burying my acne-scarred face and books in hymns, and bound my soul to the solitude life of devout prayer, studying the scant history of Albion's apple orchards, of debilitating battles, and the many ballads of war written by singers of the bygone passes. recounting, reenacting, and rewriting into thick leather-bound books, inscribing histories, stories of lives lived many years yonder, until the council had driven me to lead the very lives I had written and read about. Now in the twilight of my life, I have been reborn, cementing myself further in said books, in the ink-filled pages spilt by my own shaking fingers, only in pursuit of education and in a desperate defense of faith and worship. It was as if the years past me had been a blur, only but a short moment, stuck in a time upon a time, stemming from my birth that I cannot recall, to the student and soldier of knowledge I had become. Now, in my adult years, kneeling before my Pope and my revered masters, I studied much and have learned much under their divine insight and have been enlightened at long last. I shut my eyes and kissed each of their hands, then held their soft knuckles onto my sweated forehead. The large glass chandelier hanging from the high church ceiling enveloped the council hall in a dim embrace. And all at once, I am filled to the brim with love and a profound sense of loyalty. Faith has hugged me, holiness has cradled me, godliness has cleansed me with every red residue that had settled and stained from my parched, searching lips onto those ever-righteous hands. I am grateful. I do not know yet of what my future holds, nor do I know what my Lord will gift me, what he has planned and prepared for me, but I know that my Lord is ever merciful and I am ever the optimist. He will take care of me and watch over me as he had done many years before, as I laid there with my brothers, infants near death, wrapped with no warm blanket, impoverished and hungry, orphaned on an unmanned boat, set adrift in the lake outside Castle Nightingale, found only by the church fathers in the stroke of midnight, in the middle of their nighttime mass. As I laid armorless upon the many battlefields across Albion, I had been already a miracle for my mere survival thus far, and the Lord will indeed continue to keep me safe. In return I am indebted, and will forever be in servitude, to the divine, and willingly too, I had come to cherish this path that was laid out, like the final table banquet before me. Brothers in knowledge, brothers in the council, my loving, dearest brothers in faith. They had all taken sips from the grail. The blood had been ordained holy in the wine. Now I had drunk from the very same grail. I had been ordained to the truth. By drinking from the grail, I had undergone the rite of passage, the right of my kin. They were no longer my masters, and I will now call them my brothers. And I will now have a family to call my own, a family I always yearned for. With my tear-filled eyes, I silently wept on my vibrating hand, which had been still clenching onto their sturdy hand, out of a desperate longing, the longing and search of true companionship, for I was so alone in the world. There they stood, all watching me, with their confused, white, pale faces.
You are not like them.
Pope Innocent had whispered in my ears. He brushed my tear-soaked fringes away from my face and caught me by the arm. Lifting me up on my 2 feet, he gave one of his stern, concerned looks, squinting his eyes and angling his lips to the right side of his face.
I need not remind you, but today you will forget about such treacheries and will start afresh for the 3rd time. They no longer own you, nor you owe them. You belong to us now. Come, Saharian, let us pray.
I prayed and prayed until my mind became dizzy with the repetition of supplications, of the nightly liturgy, until the words hummed in my mind like buzzing bees, as if I'd been a bee myself, living all together with my brethren, huddled and cloaked together in the hive, buzzing, murmuring, humming in complete unison, working, labouring, mourning over the painstaking, relentless beat of life, suffocating in the heat of my own home. The very act of living is so very hard. Lately I have succumbed to bouts of night terrors, and I awake in a ridiculous fever, my body steaming with perspiration. No amount of heavy breathing, nor quoting scripture can calm me. The dreams are the same every night, where I am drowned in a pool of water, my head forced down by a wolf's claw, as I stare helplessly at its red eyes beaming bright in the darkness, hearing its eerie howl of laughter, while I try my best to scream for help, and yet help never comes. Every dream, I disappear into the void, into the blackness of the pool below. I awake in the night breathless, my lungs refuse to give way, and for a sickly moment I am unable to breathe. These dreams have happened so often now that I tend to wait them out. Wait until the air shocks my system, until my lungs finally expand to breathe. The first real breath I inhale so deeply I think my heart will burst open. I no longer cry at the thought of these dreams. I no longer feel so completely and utterly alone in these dreams, for my dreams and reality are now so very alike. I feel suffocated in the castle, and although I love my now brothers in faith and seek their counsel, I will forever be different. I know that. I have always known. Even now, as I kiss their hands, even now, as I join them in prayer, who I am will forever taint me, and they will never accept such a disaster of a man and the severity of what hangs over me. I am tarnished. My blood is not the same as those who stand in front of me, and while I can rid this land, this country, from those who wish to destroy it, those who adhere to nothing but heresy and blasphemy, while I can dedicate my life, vanquishing and purging as many evils that roam Albion, I can never rid myself, for I am one of those very same evils that has plagued Albion, and I will forever be that evil. I've seen the way my Pope and my masters have searched me, the way their eyes glisten and gloat over their protégé, under the pounding beams of the lighthouse torches that happen to run along every cornerstone of this castle. The Lord's Prayer had been recited by the council brothers and I late into the night, and the moon rose high in the sky above the lighthouse, and Brother Ambrose of Nafferton North, who was at times a loud, boisterous figure, prone to laughter and merriment, had snuffed out the candles with his spitted fingers. Even he had muted in the wake of the full moon, and we watched and cuffed our hands in quiet service. Our rumbled, muffled voices melded with the clicking crickets, bats flapping, and foxes screeching outside. The colourful glass-painted windows opened at ease with the brothers' soft touch. If God had given souls to the unliving, to the windows who not even sense the brothers' caress, if the inanimate object were to feel its glass tense under the brother's sweltering hand, it would most definitely would cower and succumb and shiver with his touch, like a forbidden lover. The windows staggered backwards with an impulsive hesitancy. If only I had this almost commanding trait that the council seemed so easily possess. Their laying hand on my shoulders, on my head and fleeced hair, on my cheek and back, their very touch alone once had me feigning sleep. It had brought about an immense pain in me. They had treated me like I were their son. How I wish I were, for not even a shared blood child could succumb to such intimacy. Saint, that is what the people had called them, and they had never once called the council members by their true names, and I too had never known until now. My brothers each gifted me their earlier manuscripts in exchange for the promise and blessing of a future knowledge from a future time. We gazed through the window, my brothers and I, with their sea-blue light-reflecting eyes, and my opaque, black eyes fixated in only the moonlight, cloudless sky.
Castor and Pollux rained down upon us tonight on the night of your ordination.
He had been the first to erase himself from the starry trance, and was rummaging through the lighthouse library.
Ah, there it is.
He blew the dust off jacket and wiped it double clean with his long robe sleeves, and then proceeded to recite from the Book of Heavenly and Fixed Stars.
Dioscuri, inseparable and devoted Roman twin brothers, both of whom succored marooned sailors and sanctioned sacrifices for assenting winds. Travelers who bear witness to the Gemini constellation are considered to have safe passage and protection from the sea's mighty horrors.
He had continued on with his fond retelling of the twin pair, but my thoughts had been elsewhere, by the very mention of twin. No, we were not. We were born 3, not 2, and neither any of us had known what had become of one another. We were not inseparable. We were separated by cruel words and cruel minds, and we were not at all devoted to one another, for none of us were given a slither of a chance. Our souls were ripped apart from one another, and we were barely out of our shared womb before each brother became ignorant of the other. We were living shadows in each other's lives. Shadows and dust in Nightingale Castle, in this tenebrous lighthouse, and I do not know if they had ever even lived in this castle at all, after we were found. Together we were born, and together we were found, but we did not have the blessing of ever living together, cooking a meal together, laughing, sobbing, complaining, clasping each other's arms in the cold, bleak winter darkness, warming up our faces in a campfire, begrudgingly sharing swords, helmets, and armor, fighting, playing, frightfully covering our heads in a shared blanket, in a shared bed, giddy with sharing scary stories. None of that had come to pass. Kins we were not, and I despair for my brothers, and I upon coming to terms of how we were not even what we were born to be. Triplets, God forbid, a trinity of blood-bound souls, and all 3 of us were lost travellers upon an endless, never-ending, deep sea. No constellation, no star in the sky, however spacious, could merge us in the way our parents had merged us in our conception. It was the council that parted us, the same way the midwife must have ripped apart my mother's placenta at our birth.